And essentially, what this would create for us, if we're to talk about in a world scale, is the world. But like in terms of countries, counties, towns. But it's a case of thinking of this circuit board as absolutely huge with potential additions added on. We see things replicated all over the world, don't we? We saw these before. This is like meant to be one of the biggest motherboards in the world, but look at that. Hey everyone, I'd like to welcome you to a deeper conversation with Michelle Gibson and Adam Szecowka. Welcome, guys.
Great to be here, Chad.
Likewise, Chad. Great to be here.
So today we're going to be exploring further the energy harvesting, the Earth's grid, everything we've touched upon on mine and Michelle's last video, the Mother Earth video, and just taking it a lot further. Adam's going to be bringing a lot in regards to his finding, which is just all over the place, absolutely amazing. Michelle, as always, with her just incredible research, is going to take us all over the board as well. So really, guys, I'm going to let you lead the way. Michelle, you've built a presentation, haven't you? So we'll guide our way through that, and I'll add some points along the way, guys. Welcome to the journey, guys. Let's go.
We were talking that the three of us have different gifts related to the Earth's energy grid system and what's going on that really complement each other nicely. So we've been pinging off each other with the information that Chad's been uncovering, and information that I've been uncovering, and information that Adam's been uncovering. And it's all connected to bringing forward a much bigger and clearer picture of exactly what we're talking about with the Earth's grid system, how it was originally constructed. And I absolutely believe it was originally constructed for the benefit of all life and as a free energy generating electromagnetic grid system based on sacred geometry. Adam has some incredible abilities. If you want to talk a little bit, Adam, about what you do and what you're able to piece together from your special abilities.
Yeah, so my special abilities is that I've always been guided by the Earth energy grid and the Earth energy lines. I've always been guided through synchronicities and downloads, knowing that I am being guided through it from my personal experiences through family life, but we had to go through some of the traumatic experiences. We've always had that guidance where to go, and then it's led me into realizing that there is something else out there, a greater force that we connect to. We can receive the support and get all the answers we need. There's that divine source creation that we're all connected to. So that led me into that creation, and then that led me on to the work we actually do now, which is house healing and healing people's energies, looking through the Earth grid and how the Earth energies affect people's health and biology. So that's the kind of work that I do now, as well as being a researcher alongside the work that I do as well, to uncover the histories that have been hidden from us, like you both are doing, Michelle and Chad, to get the truth out there to people, basically.
And so the title of this presentation is Compelling Evidence for the Harvesting of the Earth's Original Energy Grid System and Us. And for the three of us, it probably goes back a little ways anyway, but Chad put out two videos not too long ago. One was his original video on giant trees, and another was a video that he did on was it Amusement Parks, Asylums?
Amusement parks, asylums, and the old world.
Yep. So those two videos are directly connected to the information we're going to be providing in this presentation. And also the interview that Chad and I did not too long ago, where he did a conversation with me about giant trees and other related things. And then Adam provided some feedback from that of things that he found after watching that conversation between Chad and I. And then I put out, actually it was a re-upload of a series I did several years ago that was very relevant, called bonanza, the correlation of mining and mineral occurrences on the Earth's energy grid. And Adam came back with some incredible findings based on that particular video that we're going to be talking about. And so that kind of leads us here. Chad and Adam, not too long ago, Chad put out his energy harvesting video based on his findings in Oxford around his birthday. And then Adam did a part of that to show the relationship between the Twin Cities with Oxford. And then there was more stuff about the grid lines coming out from that, from what Chad was finding. So all of those videos are good to watch in conjunction with the conversation we're about to have, because this led to us talking here today about joint findings that contribute to all of this, and how the harvesting is happening, where it's happening. There's just so much information here, and it's mind-blowing in scope. That the Earth's grid is real, and the harvesting of the Earth's grid and us is real. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I put a PowerPoint together to make sure that we are able to touch on all the points that we were finding together. And I'm going to go ahead and go to my first part, or I'm going to go to this part called Deer Parks, Asylums, and Homeless Shelters, and the connections, and what might really be going on here. And so Chad identified deer parks in the research that he was doing on the amusement park and asylum video, and sent this information on Wikipedia, just in terms of what's out there about deer parks. And I'm going to, Chad, if you can talk about your findings, and then we can talk about deer parks a little bit.
Yeah, so obviously through watching the other videos, you might see that I use a lot of old maps, and I was researching my own area's history as well, and I was coming across the term deer park a lot. So it turns out that these deer parks, as you are aware, were significant of the past. Things that seem to be important, the enclosed walls, they've then been turned into manors and theme parks and national parks and other type ventures for attractions, which, speaking about the energy harvesting, especially at theme parks, and taking energy from one point of joy to fear, these places seem to be key. They seem to be very important.
And what they even tell us, and what you can find easily on a search, sounds kind of weird. It's an enclosed area containing deer, just looking at what Wiki says, bounded by a ditch and bank with a wooden park pale on top of the bank, or by a stone or brick wall. The ditch on the inside, increasing the height, and some had leaps. An external ramp, and the inner ditch was constructed on a grander scale, allowing deer to enter the park but preventing them from leaving.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, the whole story that goes along with it is very strange. And it says it started after the Norman conquest of England in 1066, when William the Conqueror seized existing game reserves. And that's when deer parks were flourishing under the Normans, and all that other stuff. Norman kings maintained an exclusive right to keep and hunt deer, and established forest law for this purpose. And then it, identifying former deer parks, I pulled that out to talk about the reconstruction, and that they were bounded by significant earthworks, topped by a park pale, typically of cleft oak stakes. They have a curving, rounded plan, possibly to economize on the materials. do deer parks in areas with plentiful building stone had stone walls instead of a park pale.
Now,
Any thoughts?
Yeah, to me, Michelle, there's two things. All three of us were talking about it earlier, weren't we? If we, there's a really strange and similarity between what we're in as reality to the park itself. Some may argue that we're in a huge park ourselves with the walls, etc. But what I find, just putting that aside, what I find interesting about the parks themselves, I think we touched on it in the last video when we were talking about people living in trees, or that type of avatar type scenario, these rounded places of power. Because I think parks are obviously very significant in terms of location as well. We find the mining has happened there on all the old maps. Parks were, and me and Adam found also that in the name park, in one of the videos I've done parks, is the name Ark. And, the Ark is significant, isn't it? Not only in power generation, but also in, if you look at it as Noah's Ark, keeping a particular keeping energy all in one place, or particular peoples in one place. Parks make me think of car parking and cars. Now, if we change the K on the end to a C, and it's an anagram, we find car in it. And also, if an anagram of that is a carp, if we change the K again to a C, we get the word carp. And in the UK especially, I'm unsure about in the US, carp pools are huge. Carp pools, again, pools, water. We spoke about potentially, being a huge energy source, the reservoirs and all the water reserves across the earth. But yeah, that was just something I was looking at earlier, just looking at the actual word of park itself. And there's a lot in it. And obviously we know the D can be flipped, or the P can be flipped to become a D or a B. So when we start doing that, we get a lot of different words pop up that all seem to be related. And Adam pointed out in one video about Karnak. And it's nearly there, it's very much there in the name as well with park. And Karnak was the two Karnaks, isn't there, Ad, with the C and the one with the K?
Mm-hmm. One's in Egypt, and there's another one in France and Brittany.
In Brittany.
Yeah.
And one's with a K and one's with a C.
That's it. So me with the letters, I'm very much like that, Michelle. I like to, I often, because I know back in time they use different letters, and it's easy to hide other things in the letters. So a K could easily be a C, a P could easily be a B, or a B could be a D. And it might sound strange to some, but it does reveal lots of links by just flipping letters.
Right. And it's also important to note that early modern languages like early modern English and early modern Scots and early modern Spanish and early modern French all came about around the same time.
Yeah.
And so it's extraordinarily interesting to do research on that, because that was when all these new languages came in. And that they've been tinkering with everything. So, why not tinker with the language? And I've been doing some research about that. And it's interesting because you asked me, were there deer parks over here?
Mm-hmm.
And I got back to you. I said, well, there was a deer park road where I grew up. And that's outlined in the red here. And I grew up right around here because the swimming pool I went to when I was a kid was at Londonderry Apartments. So this was really close to where I grew up.
Wow.
And so Chad got back to me right away. And before I go into that, I'll say there's a Borer Park here. Probably some other parks. There's elementary schools. Actually, a lot of stuff going on here in this place where I grew up outside of Washington, D.C. So kind of interesting. A Muddy Branch Road. Muddy Branch. So Chad got back to me right away with a quarry that he found on Deer Park Road. My Deer Park Road. And Chad, you were finding quarries when you were doing the research, following the maps and finding the deer parks and everything, right?
Yeah. Yeah, lots of them. Huge ones like this one, just in key locations and very close to amusement parks, very close to other attractions, if you like, yeah, or significant places, airports, amusement parks. Yeah, seem to be placed. It's to me, I could just see the tree outline in a lot of it, Michelle, and I think there's a lot in yours that are potential beings of other sorts, but a lot of them are trees. I'd definitely argue.
And so far we've got a connection with Deer Park on both sides of the Atlantic. The finding of some kind of quarrying and something going on. And again, I'm going to put out that this is energy harvesting, and there's a lot of that going on where you see sites like that of some kind. You see that with places that you can see the star fort that's been peeled, the layers have been peeled off, and you can still see the bastions and things like that. I've come across those in my research. So, there's definitely that going on. But I want to kind of tie something else in, because this is rather curious here. I'm going to talk about Colney Hatch a little bit, and this was something that a commenter left me to take a look at Colney Hatch. And Colney Hatch is in the London borough of Barnet. It marked the southern boundary of the royal hunting ground of Enfield Chase in the hamlet of Southgate. Is it Southgate? And then I saw down here, there was a windmill here. And I'm going to have you talk a little bit about that, Chad. The royal hunting ground of Enfield Chase. And before we move on to the lunatic asylum that was here, I want Chad to talk a little bit about windmills. And, I think there's a very likely possibility that these deer parks and royal hunting grounds were hunting something very different from deer. I mean, that's really the sense that I'm going to get. And you're going to see more examples of why I believe that in the next couple of slides. But Chad, if you can talk about windmills a little bit.
I'll let Adam talk about the energy. Is that all right, Ad? The positive energy from a windmill. But just quickly before that, because windmills are related potentially like to obelisks and other things like that the male energy. But one observation I want to make before Adam speaks on it is I told you about, I think we might get to it, but about flipping the W to an M. I mean, again, back to this etymology and letters. Sorry, guys, I'm on that at the moment. But the W could be an M, and then we get mind mill. Or if we change the W in mill, we get will. And mills were horrible places, and it broke people's will. It's there in the words, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? So these places, asylums, and you're talking about that these deer parks potentially weren't deer parks, and I'm with you. There's a darker side to all this as well. And if we just read that as mind will or wind willed, it's talking about bending people's will or breaking people's will.
And you were talking about mills and workhouses being programming centers of some kind.
Yeah, I feel there's a lot of evidence out there pointing towards these asylums and hospitals, all these massive scale buildings that you see from the past are all to do with this reprogramming, forgetting the past, basically locking away the problems. And, that would be people like me and you and Adam, or people that have seen too much, lots of reasoning. And, there's so much to back this up without going too much into it. And even down to, people reading and writing and just lost history, resets. It all falls into the same type of, well, it's all the same thing. And I think all three of us kind of feel the same around these asylums and hospitals, which are now, by the way, the asylums, have turned into either hospitals or prisons, or they're still used in the world today. That energy is still being harnessed. The programming is still going on. within the prisons, within the hospitals, and it's energy as well as programming. I often think it's dual, or it can be used one way. It's harvesting the energy, but it's also transmuting or influencing people, programming them, if you like, you know, and like what our TV does. All these things in society, it's two-tone. But yeah, to answer your question, sorry, Michelle.
No, that's great. And I'm going to have some examples of what you were just talking about. Adam, what's your read on this?
Yeah, so I completely agree with what Chav is saying about, obviously, windmills in particular can be used as a harvesting device, if you like, because windmills, traditional windmills for wheat and barley, obviously that's done usually during the harvest season, and because the shape of the mills are located in a spherical kind of cone shape, that encourages the energy to naturally swirl in a kind of vortex because of the shape of the actual windmills and the structure of it. So it's basically using the Earth's actual energies, because if you look at a lot of the windmills, they're placed and built on areas which have got energy lines, and windmills are usually built on top of hills and some kind of mounds in order to harvest that wind energy, in order to grind all the corn and wheat that it's supposed to do. And because there are a lot of energy lines going on it, they're using the energy from the energy lines in order to produce something. In this case, windmills, if they're producing wheat, for example, they're using that natural energy from the wind and the earth, which does in fact produce electricity as well, needed in order to produce all the grinding mechanisms in order to produce a certain product. So even that product will be like flour, for example. So they're used very symbolically. And windmills, to me, remind me similar to lighthouses, whereas lighthouses are associated with the coast and in the sea, and they serve a similar kind of purpose because they're in a similar kind of shape as a windmill inland. So in my opinion, windmills are the equivalent of like a lighthouse, as you would see on the coast, in order to serve a certain purpose, whether that be to help people or to be used in other instances. It's debatable depending on what the purpose of it originally was.
Right.
So it's definitely used as a type of energy harvesting mill, I believe.
And what I'm finding in my research is that lighthouses served a much greater purpose than what they're advertised as on the Earth's grid system. Probably something to actually do with light energy,
yes,
carrying light, distributing the energy. So they're significant. And windmills and so-called water towers look like lighthouses too. So there's a lot of obfuscation that we're the recipients of. Did you have any other comments, Adam, on the grid, this particular location as called infield chase, and what they might actually have been hunting there, and its relationship to the grid?
Absolutely. Yeah, further in the PowerPoint, I've got my own presentation that I've set up, and it includes a forest which is a royal hunting ground, which one of the lays come through. So I'll mention a bit more about that further in the video. So that's an important aspect. So refer back to what you were just saying here. That will confirm another location for you.
Because now we're gonna head on into like a primo example of what we're talking about. So I mentioned that the insane asylum in Colney Hatch is located right next to this, on the southern boundary of this park. Before I go into the asylum, I thought it was interesting to note the Southgate Underground Station that's located there, looking kind of like a ray gun there at the top or something. And so it's got the circular shape, and then it's got this interesting device up here that looks kind of like science fiction or something. So another rail, and we're going to talk about rails again here in just a moment. So the underground, and this was it became known as the Friarn Insane Asylum in Colney Hatch. And it opened in 1851, which is like a red letter year in all this reset narrative. That was the same year as the Crystal Palace exhibition in London was in 1851. A lot going on during that time. And the term Colney Hatch became associated with the concept of madness. The new Southgate Railway first opened in 1850 near the lunatic asylum. Train service stopped daily at what became known as the Friern Hospital. Today, the former lunatic asylum was converted into luxury apartments. And I believe you've talked about that previously, Chad. The asylum's being repurposed into something else. So like in this case, luxury apartments.
Yeah. So what I seem to find is the asylums get repurposed for some reason. But what's important about it is the energy that still stays in those locations. It's almost like it's been tarnished or taken or manipulated, and then something has been put on top of that then absorbs that energy or then changes it back. I feel with this one again, there's two ways to look at it. It could either be absorbing that energy from the asylums and all that negativity. They go into these places, take all the energy, drain all the resources, and then put something on top of it like a park. The park then refills, potentially all the energy refills that spot again, or the negative energy is being transmuted through those people, one of the two. So yeah, consistently repurpose these asylums.
So there's the park. That's the other thing that the land was redeveloped into, was the Friern Village Park, and right next to the railway tracks here. So the park theme comes up again.
A retail park. That's just shops. It's full of shops. So again, energy. Yeah.
So I don't know if you've ever heard of the Necropolis Railway. I first heard of it in a video by Paul Cook that he did a couple of years ago. And the viewer that left me the comment about Colney Hatch said there was a connection with the London Necropolis Railway. And that was a railway line that was said to have been developed along existing tracks of the London and Southwestern Railway, formerly known as the London and Southampton Railway. And it had as well main branches from the main line and Brookwood. And Brookwood was a cemetery that it would take bodies and people to. So the Brookwood, so this particular railway first opened in 1854, reportedly to transport corpses and mourners to the newly opened Brookwood Cemetery, also known as the London Necropolis, in Brookwood, Surrey, at the time the largest cemetery in the world, located 23 miles or 37 kilometers southwest of London, and it closed in April of 1941.
Yeah, wow.
And you've even got this picture of the cemetery from workhouses.org.uk. And then you've got the, railroad tracks in the forest, just a little bit left. And that's another thing we can talk about in different respects throughout all of this. But that sounds pretty weird to me. Have you ever heard of it?
Not until you had sent it me and I researched it and just thought it was weird. Yeah.
So they've got this need to transport all of these bodies to the world's largest cemetery at the time. In the mid 1800s, starting in the mid 1800s.
On one of the last videos, Michelle, I showed another train station that was next to the asylum. It was only made for the asylum. It had its own train station. So you asked the question, and it was, it led to a brickyard. It led to a brickyard where they made red bricks. So, you hate to put it all together, don't you? But it's it seems like they were killing people on mass scales in cases, doesn't it? And
yeah, I see the 19th century as an absolutely horrible time for humanity. Yeah. And but the thing is, they have to tell us They don't tell us in any other way, but you can find this information, so it's out there if you look for it. And then when you start connecting dots, it all kind of comes together into a clearer picture. And what's really interesting is, you mentioned prisons and hospitals playing a similar role today, and you find the same thing with homeless shelters.
Mm-hmm.
And I found this when I was looking around Vancouver, Washington, and Portland, Oregon. And the Bybee Lakes Hope Center is a homeless shelter on top of what looks like a starfort point, and it's right next to a wetlands natural area, an urban wetlands. And I'm convinced that wetlands are ruined land that was previously part of this civilization that's partially sunk. And this is just a really good example, because you can't convince me that that's a natural feature there, that the starfort point. So they've got this homeless center there now, and it's right next to rail yards. Right next to it. That's what you see right here. It's the BNSF Ford rail yard. And I'm finding it's not uncommon to find the presence of historical rail yards and rail lines co-located with estuaries and wetlands and starforts. It's not unusual at all. And then somebody left me a comment about Haven for Hope in Houston, a big homeless shelter there. And it's, surrounded by rail lines here. And he was wondering, what's going on here? Is there something dark that's actually going on here? How they treat the mentally ill and homeless population, which nobody pays attention to anyway. Same idea with orphanages and boarding schools, things that we hear about and know about. But, we're talking about people that have kind of been lost in the system, lost to society, probably don't have any connections with people that may not even know where they are. And so, it's just very suspicious. And just putting it out there, looks like there's something going on. And before I move on to Crich Mount, is there anything else that you would like to add, anybody?
The energy harvesting seems to be going on a few different scales. You've got the mass one, which seems to be areas and places on the earth and buildings. But then you've got the lowest, well, it's not lower side, but the other side of human harvesting. And I think the homeless shelters and all of that, which I think you're edging to, Michelle, plays a huge part in the nastier side of humanity itself. It's a bit different what we're talking about, harvesting the energy in a stadium compared to potentially, kidnapping or taking these people to put them through things. I think these are prime centers for those missing people, but that's a completely different video. But I do think there's two sides to it. Right.
Now, this particular one's in Houston, Texas. And it's not to suggest that they're all engaged in, something nefarious. I wouldn't go that far. But the person that left me the comment seemed to think that this particular one did have some connection with something that would have a darker implication.
Yeah.
So I'm going to move on to Crich Mount and Derbyshire. And why don't you guys go ahead and touch base on this, because these are some conversations between you two.
Yeah, so what basically happened was there was a random standing stone in a car park of an industrial estate local to me. So I decided to identify the energy lines going where it goes from, and it happens to come across the same areas that Michelle mentioned in her previous videos regarding the mining and the estuaries that she released. And this particular A line from close to where I am, where the standing stone was, happens to go through Derbyshire, which Michelle mentioned in those videos. And when I looked a bit closer to where the ley line was, it happens to cross very close by to this place, Crich Mount in Derbyshire. And what brought it to my attention was that there was a network of roads to this one, like Michelle's discovered in her other videos, with the rail links, the canals and the rivers. But just directly slightly to the south of this image, so we're going to the next show, you can see there's a river running alongside it. You can see there's a river running alongside Crich Mount here. Then there's a road alongside in the middle, and then there's a railway line running directly alongside. So you've got like the three timelines of transportations basically, and there's also a canal that's located here as well. So you've got the four timelines of transportation. So you've got the river, you've got the canal, you've got the railway and the road located one next to this huge quarry site. And as Chad has mentioned in previous videos, quarries, were used for harvesting significance, and they've all got that connection with the railways, like he's mentioned as well. And this particular Crich Mount happens to have a tram museum, so it's got a museum located on it, because it used to have a tram line running through it. And as you can see, there's no large settlements nearby. Why would a quarry area have a tram system to transport it? What was it used for? Was it used to transport people to and from work when there's no settlements nearby? Or was it used for something else? So that raises that question.
And I've consistently found, canals next to railroad tracks, and also railroad tracks next to dams and reservoirs. And these are just a few examples. I mean, there's countless examples out of there, and there's typically a story that goes along with it to explain it. But what doesn't match is the technology we're told that we had at the time, being capable of constructing these massive long distance engineering projects of both the canal and the railroad tracks. And then the typical thing that goes along with that is that they stopped using the canal because the railroad was so much more efficient. So it took them 20 years to build a canal, say it was ready to go by the 1850s. And then, too bad, so sad, they stopped using them as transport because the railroads were more efficient. And that story goes along with, countless examples. It makes no sense.
Absolutely. Why spend all that investment over, should cost a lot of money back then, only to be used for such a short period of time? It doesn't make any sense at all. So there had to be another purpose behind it. So definitely.
And again, I see all of this as part and parcel of this original grid system, free energy generating system. They're all, it's all contributing to this worldwide, perfectly integrated system. And this is one of the reasons I firmly believe that the civilization that created this existed over a very, very long period of time. And I see one massive reset, but I just can't, even fathom with what I see in my own research that there were a lot of resets, because I can't grasp how it would have been possible to have this integration if they were constantly rebuilding. And I'm just saying that's where I'm coming from and why I come from there. It's because, this is really sophisticated stuff. And we're just looking at our little pieces of what we know and where we are. But my research has taken me following long distance alignments all over the earth, and I'm finding the same things in very different places. So, so you mentioned the Sikh temple.
The Sikh temple, yeah, because close to where I live, there's a Sikh temple called the Gurudwara Sahib, which is the third largest Sikh building in the UK, apparently. And this is situated very close by to one of the standing stones I've discovered in my local area. So if you allow me to share the screen, I'll be able to.
Sure.
Okay, so here's a close-up image of that particular Sikh temple. And as I'm sure one of the first things Michelle will probably notice are the onion domes at the top, and also the arches, which is typical of the Moorish architecture, which Michelle has gone into great detail in previous videos. And this alignment goes directly from Mount Crich in Derbyshire through to Warwickshire. And then literally just down the road, there's a standing stone in in an industrial area, in a car park of a corporation. And as you can see on there, it says it's a foundation stone. And that made me wonder, well, hang on a minute. Well, how can this be used as a foundation stone in the foundation of the building? There has to be something more to it than that. So when I walked past it, I decided to, when I got back, to look at the alignment, see what energies are actually running from it. And one of the things to notice is directly behind this stone here, there's an elevation, there's a mound with trees on it and also a lot of earth. And looking at historical imagery and through mapping, I can see that previously there used to be a ditch in this area, which just seems completely out of place in an industrial estate because there's another industrial unit the other side of it. Why have this kind of linear mound going in this direction? What was there previously? So I have actually discovered that there's a cross point of two energy lines running through here. One of them is the one that runs from Crich Mount in Derbyshire, and there's another one which runs from the south to north, which is exactly 3 degrees from the right stone circle in Warwickshire, on a Warwickshire-Oxfordshire border. And the other line which runs through here runs exactly from east to west, which is a midsummer energy line, which is aligned to the winter and summer solstice as well, that runs through this particular point. And then moving further, come to the next slide, just in front of the this stone where the driveway is, there are a couple of other stones which are just lying on their side. And this one looks to me like it's made of limestone. And as you can see, I would have thought this would have been a standing stone because it's got a flat base that would have been standing, and they've actually positioned it so it's actually laying down now. So from my research, when I find stones that are laying down, which should have been standing, it's a way of trying to divert the energy from the ley lines going into a certain direction. So it's like encouraging the energy from the ley line to go in towards that, where that standing stone is, where the two different energy lines meet. And here we can see a Google Earth image of where the standing stone is on the industrial estate. And literally just a few hundred feet down the road, just below the 10-pin bowling alley, is where the Sikh temple is. And what I found was interesting as well, directly to the west of where the standing stone is, I've discovered that that's where the Rosalind Franklin Laboratory is. And that was used as one of the testing centres, the largest testing centres for what's been going in the last 3 years in the UK. And basically, that particular centre, testing centre, cost pretty much nearly £1 million, so £1 billion to create, to be used as one of the largest testing centres in the world. And after 18 months, they didn't know what to do with it, and I believe it's actually been closed now. So there you have another sign of harvesting, because you sort of think, well, hang on a minute, £1 billion, just $1 million, in order to build a facility that will only be used for a short period of time. Why waste that money? And where does that money come from? You know, to build those facilities, it comes from the taxpayers, basically. So I see that personally as a form of harvesting, because people are their hard-earned money, that's being harvested for something that's only going to be used for a short period of time, less than 18 months. So in my opinion, that's another example of a form of energy harvesting. And then slightly further along the alignment, we come across an area here in Warwickshire, which is Edge Hill. And I know Michelle has done a previous video regarding Edge Hill in Liverpool, I believe it was, with some tunnels. But what's intriguing about this particular point where they cross is the energy line coming from that standing stone from Crich Mound happens to come across this place. And this is one of the first civil wars that the UK has had in the history. So there's been a lot of battle and death going on here in this area. And just to the north side here, there is a place that's actually a burial grounds where lots of bodies have actually been discovered, possibly from what's happened during where the battle happened in Edge Hill, which is one of the most famous battles. And what I've noticed as well is all this land here is owned by the military.
What Adam is trying to highlight here is extremely important. All locations of battles and wars, all of that energy, all of that death, all of that anger, all of that passion will then be soaked into the ground, into the area. That area then becomes an energy hotspot, either via changing that location and spreading that negativity into the ground, or once the battle has commenced, the energy that has been put into the ground taken. Further to this point, how much does a battle sound like battery? The word battle is literally in battery. Battles, two forces opposed against each other. We could see this on a battery as negative and positive, fighting for one winner to oppose, but in doing so, so many casualties, so many death, so much energy drained and used in one specific location. The battles of the past, where they took place, would now be full of energy, and this highlights why they build around these specific locations, which Adam will further go into. And in doing so, they harvest the energy from these locations, these past battles, which is still in the ground like a buried treasure.
And the first thing that stuck out to me are these areas here, which look to me like grids, as you can see. So to me, they look like kind of like battery packs of some kind, similar to like a vehicle battery, because of the grid designs. So I looked into great detail, done some more research on it, and actually discovered that all these green points that you can see, these grids, are actually underground bunkers. And we were told that these underground bunkers were used for a primary purpose of storing ammunition during the Second World War. And then the other thing that I realised was these bold lines here that go all around these two grids are a railway line. But looking at the railway line goes, it seems to be connecting just to these two grids and doesn't seem to be serving any settlements or any other purpose other than feeding into these grids. So what were these grids used for? Harvesting the energy, considering it was used as a battlefield, one of the bloodiest battles that were used in the UK. And it leads me on to, because Chad in one of his previous videos mentioned about the giant trees and the Burton Dasset Hills. They just happen to be located just to the right here, just where Little Dasset is, where there was a potential of being an old giant tree harvesting the energy. So you've got a natural element here, and then what was on this land before with what's happened historically with the battle. So I see this as being used as an area of harvesting energy of some description. And then further down, it continues this particular ley alignment onto the roll right stones, which is a famous stone circle near in Oxfordshire. And it's quite interesting as well, because Michelle has come up about she's doing a video later on regarding Alistair Cowley and regarding one of the stone megaliths in Cornwall, which has a circle inside the actual stone. The rhyolite stones also have a circle within one of the rocks, but this particular circle is probably about the size of somebody's clenched fist that you can actually get through, so it's a much smaller circle on it. So that this is another connection with the actual stones.
Let's go back to my slide and then we'll get to this in just a little bit.
Yep.
Because I'm going to go into Arbor Low on the next one. And this was from something you sent me, Chad.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I just want to point out, you were talking about etymology, Chad, and that's not my strength, but since you've got me thinking about trees a lot more, what's an arbor? An arbor is a shady garden alcove with sides and a roof formed by trees or climbing plants trained over a wooden framework.
Brilliant.
And then a low is a low point, level, or figure. And you see low and high associated with lighthouses a lot, the low light and the high light. So that makes me now think that maybe there's a connection.
And if we just put a H in front of harbour, A harbour. It makes harbour, and a harbour is a place where ships come. And again, ships could be related to lighthouse, and also a docking of energy or a docking. Do you know what I mean? You see how all the lines converge as well. It's just there's a lot there with that etymology. Good spot though, Michelle. Like that.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I'm definitely thinking along the lines that you've been exposing, Chad, with the importance of the trees and how the ancients might have actually been utilizing everything to terraform. Because I do think there's a connection. Maybe on the locations of trees, but not done in an energy harvesting way, like I think happened in the 19th century when they cut all the trees down. I think maybe more in a constructive kind of way with the energies and, just something significant about the actual function and role of trees. So that kind of brings us to rugby in England and North Dakota. And I'm just going to share a few things and then stop screen sharing so Adam can talk about his discovery. Okay, this is a good place. Because cement is another bizarre connection to all of this. And you picked up on rugby, which was on the first part of the alignment that I was tracking for the correlations of mines and mineral occurrences. It goes through Rugby, North Dakota. And Adam sent me the link to Rugby Cement. And it was Rugby Lias Lime and Cement Company was the original name, and it was founded in 1862. So we're still kind of in that mid-19th century time period. And when I saw that, I looked up Lias Lime, or however that's pronounced. And before I go on, there's Cemex mentioned in here. And there's a couple of things I think going on with cement. And one is that they are pulverizing ancient megalithic blocks and turning them into cement. So that's one way of, disposing of the evidence of the megaliths. I definitely think that's going on with that. And then I think there's another connection to what we were talking about previously with what might be going into some of the cement. And I don't really know enough about it to talk about it, but I have seen things and see references to that disposal of other organic matter that was once human. So I don't have a reference. That's hard to find if you're looking for it, but I have seen that come up on alternative information threads that I follow. So I looked up blue lias or lias, and so we're told that blue lias lime was part of the Blue Lias Formation that's found in southern, eastern, and western England and South Wales, and that it's a sequence of limestone and shale layers formed between 195 and 200 million years ago. So, they're always giving us this, far back in the past, geological explanation of how this was created. And this is a formation in Wales, in Glamorgan, and that's what it looks like. And we've always been conditioned to see that as like sedimentary layers and, made by nature. But, I'm just asking if you can maybe see a wall in there. Because that's what I see. And it's just part of the cover up of, how they've managed to keep this hidden from us. And then I found this example of an abandoned tram station. And I think it's in your neck of the woods, Adam. It's in Wilmcote in Warwickshire. And it's 3 miles or 5 kilometers north of Stratford upon Avon. And it's an old tramway made out of blue lias lime. And it's the description that went along with the picture when I found this was it was a derelict building and canal in Wilmcote. And, as we go forward with our conversations, a lot of abandoned rail infrastructure found all over too, above ground and underground. And so, just wanted to share that because, they want us to believe that they went and they mined the stone and they built this, whenever they built it in the 19th century. But, I think a strong case can be made that it was already there and they're just kind of putting a label on it and making it make sense, trying to make it make sense in our historical narrative.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, when I was watching the Shell video regarding the rugby in North Dakota, something clicked in my mind. Well, hang on a minute. Could that possibly be connected to the rugby in Warwickshire? So the first thing I did was just take a Google Earth shot to look at rugby in North Dakota, and I noticed that there was a quarry close by to it. So then the first thing said that reminded me of rugby in Warwickshire being used as the cement works, where there were a lot of historical quarries in the area. So I knew there had to be a connection. And then I looked into the research that I've previously done and actually realised there was an energy line connecting Rugby, North Dakota to rugby in Warwickshire. And before watching Michelle's video, I did not know about the rugby in North Dakota. It's just that I identified that particular alignment that was already in place. And here you can see where the alignment goes from rugby in North Dakota, goes through to Hudson Bay, all the way through to across Greenland and through to the rugby in the UK.
And it gets even more interesting because rugby, up until a little while ago, was considered the geographic center of North America. And rugby in England is considered the geographic center of England. And the Isle of Man is considered the geographic center of the British Isles. And now the geographic center of North America has been moved to center North Dakota, which is still on this ley line, right, Adam?
That's
checked
correct,
it out.
yes. It's still on the ley line, it just goes further south. But there's a deviation as it approaches, goes further south, a magnetic deviation that where the energy seems to go further south towards the two fault locations.
And I've got some slides showing that. So anyway, and you further found that there's a Merida, and we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, we'll talk about later in the slideshow. I mentioned that regarding that in the UK, because there's a Merida which goes through this alignment here in the US, and it's also a couple of areas in reference, which I'll mention in a few moments, regarding the Meridian in the UK and how that's connected, especially with the central part of the UK. Because as Michelle rightly said, this particular ley line in the UK actually passes through the south of the Isle of Man, which was considered the central point of the UK. And then this particular alignment ascends directly south through to the most central part of the country, as you can see here, where rugby, which at one time was considered the central part of England. And then that continues further down south, which are going to be details in a moment. So this is a picture of the cement works in Rugby. So here's just an image of the cement works as it is today. And as you can see, no thought and consideration has been taken to the local people living within the area. As you can see, it's essentially slap bang next to the household, resident settlement right next to it, with all the fumes, as you can see, being emitted from it, as well as the traffic fumes that get emitted every single day. So I'm sure, because I used to go to Rugby quite often, it's not too far from us. As soon as you go into Rugby, you do feel that the energy, that the actual air seems a lot dirtier because of the pollutants on it. And this is one of the contributing factors. And there was an area just to the west, to the east of this in Dunschurch. And I've got some weather monitoring stations. And a few years ago, that was said to have one of the worst air quality from the pollution within the UK, because the amount of traffic that's been generated from this cement works, as well as all the processes in order to process the cement. And here we can see another link with the rail links as well, with Rugby cement, with the railroad tracks, with the old cement works to transport some of the products. So again, we have the railroad connection there. And as Michelle has mentioned as well, regarding producing the lime mortar and the limestones, it was considered as being the finest place inland in the UK for its lightest limestone in the country, because of the mineral content where the cement works is actually situated. And I was quite interested doing my research to find out that in 1965, they did actually construct a 57-mile or 92-kilometre underground pipeline tunnel to transport chalk as slurry from Kensworth Chalk Pit in Bedfordshire, which is 57 miles away to the Rugby plant. So you sort of think having some tunnelling or piping system for 57 miles is quite, quite a significant achievement. Did they actually build that tunnelling specifically for that, or was there existing tunnelling infrastructure that they could have reused and served for this purpose?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely something. I was just going to say, there's definitely something going on with lime and lime kilns and things like that coming up in the research that I've seen in the 19th century. That whoever was behind whatever were keenly interested in lime and harvesting lime from these locations. And so, I feel like it's kind of knocking around something hugely significant in terms of what's actually going on here. I don't know what it is. But what I'm seeing, with the example of the cement plant in Rugby, as well as all the communities that have mines and their economy is dependent on work there. And so, they have to, work to earn a living, to live, and they're working for a major polluter or the environmental devastation of the mine. And then particularly with mining, in some kind of out of the way place, after a year, 2 years, or 5 years, they're gone and there's nothing left to replace it. And that story is repeated. So the communities are devastated, the environment is devastated, and the companies don't give a flip about what they've left behind.
Absolutely.
No
and
concern
this particular
whatsoever.
cement works in Rugby is a great example of that, Michelle, because as you can see from the research shows that 2 million tonnes a year, it's producing 2 million tonnes of cement a year from this particular processing plant. So you think, what pollution that involves. And because the new site was actually opened, what the pictures we've seen on it, in February 2000, costing millions of pounds in order to develop, and it was estimated that would produce between 800 and 1,000 lorries travelling to and from the site, adding extra pollution for those 1,000 lorries a day. What's that doing to the air quality of people living in the area? And it's something that these corporations, in my opinion, seem to do nothing about.
Perfect recycling, isn't it, guys? It propers puns the word recycling. They're killing you and then using you for the energy, and then it's just crazy, isn't it? Yeah,
absolutely. It's crazy. And then what's quite interesting as well, there's a village just to the east of Rugby called Hill Morton, and it's quite a significant place because I found out that in this particular village, which is a suburb of Rugby now, there used to be a famous family in the 1840s called the Morley family. And as soon as I read that, I thought of the Moors. And looking at this picture, it's not very clear. It looks to me like some of those people standing on there could probably be of the Moorish descent, because I'm not sure if it's the quality of the picture, but some of those look to me like they could possibly be of that Moorish Moorish descent.
Mhm.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they've really done a number on true history.
Particular area of Hill Morton is significant as well historically, because it confirms that, you know, in the 1880s, there was a lot of brick makers there, so a lot of brickworks and quarries and sand pits within the area, because a lot of the people living in that were actually brick workers and stone workers living in that area. And what is more significant as well was the famous Rugby radio station transmitter. So if we come to the next slide, we can see this was literally just outside the village. And here we can see the transmission centre that was used for Radio Rugby. And it had the world's largest wireless station with the transmitters, which were 820 foot high. And they had 12 of these, along with the total amount of masts adding up to 57 of the smaller ones, transmitting low frequency to the submarines and stuff like that. So basically, there's a huge area. We go on to the next one. You can see this was taken in 2005 from the main network of the road on the M1. You could see there was this like town of these huge transmitters scattered in the area, which could be seen from 20 miles away, covering an area of 1,600 acres or 650 hectares. And this site is actually closed between 2003 and 2007. And as it shows on here, that it was used to transmit very low frequencies to the Commonwealth as part of the Imperial Wireless chain after the 1950s.
Just sorry, mate. This is what we're talking about, though, in terms of replacing, aren't we? You know, hijacking natural
Absolutely.
creation. You know, if we look at those massive trees, but giving out good vibrations, you know, that's reminding me of the Beach Boys. I'm sorry. I love the colorful clothes you wear. And giving out goodness, and then these masks are doing the complete opposite, bro. You know, it's just
absolutely,
yeah.
And that goes as well because it was chosen for its location because it's got limestone mice and sand underneath the construction. So if you think you've got for over 60 years that it's been used to transmit the very high frequencies, all that frequency will be contained within the soil of that area.
Yeah.
And the people living in close proximity to that, I'm sure, you know, when it was in its height, when it was in full operation, that would have affected people's health living in the village of Hill Morton, for example, being subject to those high frequencies.
Mm-hmm.
And this confirms on here that it said it was some secrecy regarding one of the roles of the radio station. And it confirms that it was never actually used to transmit frequencies for the BBC as a public service, that it was actually used to connect to the station with the submarines used during the Cold War and things like that to transmit frequencies from one of being the most central parts of the UK. Why go so central? And what harm could that possibly have been doing to the people living in the area?
Definitely.
And just going on to the link with the railways, here is a Google Earth image now. This is where the Rugby radio and the masts all work within this area. And you can see the railroad running straight through it. And it has the UK's international rail freight terminal, the Derbyshire. So basically all the freight coming into the rail into the UK comes into this particular area because it's in the central part of the UK. And it's also got the canal system, the Oxford Canal, that actually runs through it as well as the main road networks connecting the M1 and the M6 to the rest of the country. And what they're actually doing now is in this area, they're actually building developments of about 16,000 new homes, producing a new city, basically a new town within itself.
After damaging the soil, lad, after spreading the frequency
After
all around that
damaging the
area.
soil, you know,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
going to still be damaged. Yeah. Yeah, so then that brings me on to exactly 16 miles to northwest of Rugby. There's this place called Meridian, which to me sounds a bit like Meridian as you get into human bodies.
Yeah.
And this place was also referred to as the centre of England. There's quite a few centres of England that have been recorded, depending on which locations they measure the centre point of the UK from. So this was considered as being the main central port in the UK. And I remember reading previously a few years ago that Meridian was actually considered as the capital years ago, before London was in existence. That was considered as the capital of England, literally thousands and thousands of years ago. And it's quite interesting. In the centre of this village, there's this stone structure, like an obelisk kind of structure, which signifies that it was considered as being the centre point of England.
What's interesting to me is that structure in the center there does not look like the same quality of work.
It doesn't, no.
That you would find in other places. It looks quite sloppy. So I would question that it was built by the original civilization that probably came later. As that looks horrible.
To me, the way the formation is that this was built at much later time, possibly even the last couple of hundred years or so, as opposed to being ancient or megalithic.
Yeah, that's really sloppy work compared.
Absolutely.
Comparatively.
It's highlighting. It's what it's highlighting is important, though, isn't it, guys? It's highlighting some potential spot there, isn't it? It reminds me of an acupuncture point, in terms of a meridian. It's sloppy work, as you say, but you can still see these places because they're highlighted like that, regardless of what's there. Whether that's a clock tower, something beautiful, just a flower garden. It's highlighting something. We've spoke about roundabouts as well, haven't we? Roundabouts often are pretty and often are very not. So that depends as well.
Absolutely. And this just happens to be a small roundabout, literally just in front of it as well, in the village of Meridian as well. So there is a roundabout literally next to it in the village, mentioning roundabouts.
Yeah.
And then that leads me onto the another section here, where Michelle was going on about the hunting grounds, because this the yellow line that we've got on here is the line that is the connecting the Rugby to Rugby, North Dakota, the Rugby in the UK. As if we extend it south, it comes across to an area through the town of Northampton, and it happens to cross an area of Szecowka Forest. And Szecowka Forest has been, like Michelle was saying, on the previous forest, it has been a royal hunting ground that has been used for people, dating back to, for a long time. But there's also happens to be a railway station that was put just outside the Szecowka Forest. That was the shortest lived rail passenger service in the UK, because it only was put in place and only served passengers for 5 months, say for 4 months. And they're telling us it was a judgment by the railway company because there wasn't enough traffic coming through on it. So why spend all that investment putting a station in and then not having it used for what it was intended for?
Mm-hmm.
So like Michelle was saying on the previous video, why, it was opened in 1892, why close it 4 months after it's been opened?
That story repeats itself over and over.
It keeps repeating itself as well all the time as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as you can see here, there's a lot of historical oak trees, especially within the Szecowka Forest, which happens to be 7 miles away from the town of Northampton and 7.7 miles from the city of Milton Keynes, where this ley line continues going through to. So you've got the sevens, which keep coming up in a lot of the stuff that we're researching as well. So it mentions some of the historical trees, which they call the druids, which are old trees, over 600 years old. And one of the most famous ones was the milking oak, where basically the cattle used to be milked. So I kind of see that, milk, that's kind of like being harvesting. So what else were they harvesting apart from the milk from the cattle, for example? Was there another purpose on it, especially being a royal hunting ground? And this is an example of the one of the historical trees that was situated in the forest. So you can see by the trunk, it would have been a rather large tree that has been hollowed out from this artist's impression. And there are so many of these historical trees, a lot of which have now been cut down. So that's pretty much regarding that alignment. So do you want to carry on, Michelle?
There's just a few more points to make with regards to the alignments from Rugby England over to Rugby North Dakota and points south of there. And I want to touch base on that because your findings are pretty significant. So this used to be the geographical center of North America in Rugby, North Dakota. And I think you mentioned there's a large open air coal mine there, Adam.
Yeah.
Okay, so center is now the geographic center of North America. So here's Rugby, here's Winnipeg, and just extend down the line that Adam showed previously. And as we mentioned, the ley line also passes through the south of the Isle of Man. And as you were saying, it seems to be connecting at least 3 central points that are the middle or center of their respective regions. And I just want to point out that the symbol of the Isle of Man is called the Triskelion, and it looks similar to the symbol of Sicily, which is called the Trinacria, which I found in past research. So I've known about this for a while. And you can find these 2 versions of the Trinacria in a search. And it's interesting that they've changed what looks to be 2 serpents around the woman's head with the wings to wheat stalks. And you still have the wings, but that seems to be a reference to Kundalini energy and, reconnecting with our crown chakra and our higher selves. That's been scrubbed, altered. But I don't know the significance of that, why it looks pretty much the same except for what's on it with the 3 legs, but it's interesting.
Just quickly on the wheat, I think it's because of the genetic programming of wheat, and then it can be programmed down genetically. Not only that, there's a lot going on with the programming of wheat in our foods, isn't it? One way to spread something. There's a lot with the wheat. It's like the butterfly, the monarch butterfly, that can be genetically modified and programmed. DNA, it's just another way for me for representing DNA. It could be represented in a few ways. I'm messing with that.
That's a really good point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. I just thought of it as being, okay, I'm going to alter this picture so they don't have any idea what we're talking about. But that makes a lot of sense.
They're also in our food as well as us, but yeah. So
it's right in the middle of my thing here. Oh, there's a Surrey up here too. So this is center, and you mentioned Fort Clark and Fort Mandan, Adam, and I'll let you talk about that, and also Merida or Merida, Meridian,
Yeah,
Meridian,
so they're very similar.
and then I'll talk a little bit about Washburn.
Sure. Yeah, because if we were to extend the line from Rugby Dakota here, it actually goes directly to this area here, this estuary, and there's a magnetic deviation that you can check out on Google Earth. And for some reason, the energy line seems to be flowing south towards where this other, I believe it's a river or canal that's in this area, is it? Looks to me like it seems to be attracted to this formation of where the Fort Madan and Fort Clark are. So that tells me it's either the material used in it or the geometric shape of that particular fort, the man-made structures that are changing the flow of that energy in that direction because of that magnetic deviation in the area. So in my opinion, that's an example of how modern man-made structures can change the flow of the actual of the telluric earth energies, of the natural energies, which the earth has emitted from the ground. So that gives a great example, because why else would the energy suddenly be diverted where these man-made structures have been put in place? You know, there's a reason for it.
And just one point before I move on to the last couple of slides. So you see what looks like a lake, you know, some kind of body of water up here. And to me, it has a classic appearance of what might have been a canal or something originally that got flooded, probably because there's infrastructure underneath this location. It looks the same. That's one of the ways they covered this up. They flooded the original infrastructure and then they turned it into a reservoir and water supply and whatnot. Nobody knows the difference, you know, unless you start really looking around it and going and seeing it. And going to some lakes outside where I was living in Oklahoma at the time, Oklahoma City, at Lake Thunderbird in Norman, Oklahoma, and Lake Arcadia in Edmond, Oklahoma, I saw that was where I first started to see the evidence that, you know, in fact, that's how they were covering up ancient infrastructure. So I just wanted to point that out because that's what it looks like, you know, just kind of like a fat lake or river or vein. Go into veins there
Yeah.
for you, Chad. But I just want to make a point because I noticed Washburn situated between the two, and it brought back to my mind that when I was tracking the route of Lewis and Clark from their expedition in the early 1800s after the Louisiana Purchase, they went right through here, and they were said to have built. Get my stuff out of the way here, figure out what I'm doing. They were said to have built Fort Mandan to live in for the winter of 1804 and 1805. So that was attributed to Lewis and Clark and their group. Washburn was said to have been founded in 1882 and named after entrepreneur, politician, and soldier Cadwallader C. Washburn, who founded a mill that later became General Mills, the big food company, cereals and things like that. So Lewis and Clark came this way, and I think their story was very different than what was advertised. And a lot of the 13 family names came up on this trip of their expedition, like DuPont and Astor and Rockefeller and Standard Oil. And, you know, now seeing, you know, the central location of this journey just adds even more questions to what the Lewis and Clark expedition was actually doing there. And I question a lot of the history that we're taught anyway. And, you know, I think at some point that our history becomes real history and that the controllers have written themselves into the narrative and they're telling us what they're doing. I think before that time, they might have based some things loosely on some real people and events, but I just really question, you know, the reality of a lot of what we're taught about our history as we go back in time. And then when I talked about the shoddy looking place in Meriden, I just kind of give you a better example of what I'm talking about with the obelisk in La Crosse, Wisconsin, where the founder of Washburn, North Dakota, was said to have been buried. So this was his memorial. And that's another thing they did with obelisks and other, you know, antiquitech and infrastructures. They turned them into memorials and, you know, had this whole story about what when it was built and why it was built. And, you know, to me, this is an example of the handiwork of the original civilization and not what we saw a couple of in your slide presentation, Adam.
Yeah, absolutely.
You find a lot of obelisks that are somebody's memorial.
Yeah.
All over.
Yeah.
And I just want to show one more thing, if I can figure out how to get out of here. Okay.
You know, it was
Um,
interesting. It was
then,
enclosed as well, Michelle, wasn't it? That with the blue fence around it. Was talking about a deer park earlier in the enclosement. You know, and especially like on the old photos of the Axis Mundi and stuff, when you've got the tree in the middle. You know,
Mm.
the representation almost.
so this is the Royal Pavilion in Brighton Beach. It was built in 1787, starting in 1877 or 1787 as a seaside retreat for the Prince Regent George, and that it was built in an Indo-Saracenic style, prevalent in India for most of the 19th century, and is the work of architect John Nash. But I mean, to me, it's kind of like a classic Moorish temple. When you're talking about the Sikh temple.
And it's quite coincidence relating to rugby, because one of the alignments from rugby actually does pass along to Brighton, and it does actually pass through this Brighton Pavilion. So you know they're all connected energetically through these alignments.
Right.
It just goes to show. And why is the architecture the same on these alignments?
Michelle, have you covered the Salt Lake? Because that pier, that pitch you was just showing up. It was like, wow. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's they used to went swimming it, and it's like an 1800s built pier. That's it there, Saltar, the Saltar. All I just thought it looked very much like that.
With the dome shapes, exactly. Yeah, they
Yeah,
do,
but
don't they?
yeah. Obviously, a lot could have changed, couldn't it? But from the side, you know.
Yeah, so it's Salt Lake City, the Great Salt Lake in Utah. And you know, this goes back to, this was a worldwide Moorish civilization.
Mm-hmm.
Rewritten the narrative and, you know, chopped everything out of it, and they burned down a lot of these places. White City in London. I'm going to share my screen again just to give you an example. This doesn't exist anymore. They used it for several World's Fairs, and it's gone. It's completely gone, and it's just beautiful architecture. And they've supported their narrative by getting rid of everything that contradicted their narrative. And again, I'm just making the point that it's hard for people to grasp, because you know, it's gone. And there's a story around the stuff that still exists. I'm looking for a ride that was called the Flim Flam, and I want to say it was, let me try this.
You could probably go across all the piers then, couldn't you? From what I've just saw, if you went across all the piers, you could match up all the world again as just more evidence across all the piers, couldn't you? Potentially.
Yeah, I can't find what I'm looking for, but you know, talk about the Chicago World's Fair. There's also called the White City, like White City in London, you know, with canals and gondolas and, you know, this beautiful architecture and an obelisk right here. And then there's hardly anything left standing of the original Chicago World's Fair, but this is what Chicago used to look like. And they've just destroyed everything and, you know, replaced it with, you know, far inferior infrastructure and experiences. But I'm not personally, I'm not guessing when it comes to this Moorish civilization. The evidence is there, but we don't see it because it's not supposed to be there, and because it's been attributed to other builders, you know, like John Nash with the Royal Pavilion in Brighton Beach, and Sir Christopher Wren, and, you know, all these other people have been given credit for it.
Yeah.
But they didn't build it.
Yeah.
I found it interesting that if we change one of these in deer and another, it's the same. It's deer as in deer, isn't it? You know, the deer that you put on top of a letter, which means something of high importance, you know, or high regard. So it's only small, but I just thought that's what I was doing, messing around with different things. And this gets us to the idea that these places of these deer parks were significant, very significant. If we flip the letters in deer, spelt with the EA, we get reap. So, that's also significant of potentially, well, we know what's going on at these places in terms of the harvesting, etc. It's in the wording. Thought that was weird. Turning it around, you had beer, and then when Adam was talking about all the wheat and barley and everything to do with the mills,
and also hunting as well. Harvesting and hunting are so interconnected. Like we've discussed through the hunting areas or the hunting grounds, obviously with deer and with windmills and stuff like that, that's harvest. It's all some kind of harvesting energy.
Yeah.
Because hunting can be seen as harvesting as well, because obviously it's a similar kind of, just a slightly different definition of the same thing.
100%. What else? What I was thinking with the beer ad, it influences, doesn't it? It's another one of those things that severely influences. Somehow from Pia in Deer, I got to Peter Parker, and I just thought that was funny because, Deer Park is very similar to Peter Parker, but then Peter reminded me of Pete, the Pete that you find in the ground. And I know it's all a bit...
It makes sense, though.
Yeah.
I know, mate, it's very revealing. I found Beale in there, and I know one of the devil names for the devil was Beale. And also, funny enough, the police first name was the Peelers. I know that's probably no relevance, but one of the founds I think about deer is what a deer represents. And when I was looking up, it said spiritual authority. And it's quite a symbolic representation, isn't it?
And the deer actually represented the ancient civilization of Mu.
That makes sense.
You find deer imagery, like Tibet, the seal, it has two deer facing each other, kind of like two sphinxes facing each other. And also it shows up in imagery of the ancient civilization. So I'm sure there's a connection with that, and they've just inverted everything and turned it into a spell or, something to bind us. Because I'm afraid that's what's been going on. I wish I had a happier story to tell, but they're definitely intent on binding us and keeping us distracted and not focused on what's really going on and harvesting our energy.
I agree so much myself. I agree so in regards to, say, the deer parks, we think something more was going on. I think there's a lot pointing towards that, but it also could be a symbolic representation of what you've just said, of the older civilization, and the hunting of these deers is the representation of the hunting of the people of the past, and then the regeneration of the growth of the park and things like. There's just so much there. As you've just hit the nail on the head with deer itself, when we think of the deer parks. And here it talked about the deer representing gentleness, heart, intelligence. So they're hunting that. It's love ultimately, isn't it? And positivity.
Right.
And
that's the reverse of what they want. And so that absolutely resonates with me, Chad, because the original human is a fractal of the creator. And if we knew we had all those superpowers and we were aware of them, which I believe that the original civilization was, and how they were able to create all these amazing things, they don't want that. They want us controlled, and they want our energy because they don't have it. And they would be the negative beings that have set up this system in the new world from the old world.
Absolutely. And it's hiding the old civilizations which actually did live in peace and harmony with the architecture, different centuries, all parts of the world, where they living, fighting each other, they're living in harmony in order to create something positive.
100%.
And they've used race and religion to divide people instead of unite people.
Yep.
And again, to keep the focus away from them and on each other, so we don't question what else might be going on. And they, my understanding is they can't touch us anyway because we're sovereign beings. And so they've had to create this unnatural system and get us to do their dirty work. And unfortunately, it's been, quite effective. I don't believe that they're going to get away with it.
No, it's over now because everything has a cycle. Now it's the end of their cycle because, it's all been set in stone for cycles a certain period of time and they know it's over. It's just that they're just throwing their toys out the pram at this stage at the moment, just trying to grab hold of the last bit of control they think they have. But, they know it's all over. So,
yeah. And I know the intent of my work is not to scare people and say, it's been bad. It got really bad here. But that's why I want to end on a positive note, because a lot of people know the negative stuff, but they don't know the positive stuff or the spiritual stuff. And, want the evidence of things that they can feel and touch and see. And when the news and the news cycle is all negative and what seems to be going on is all negative, and I'm not saying it's not negative, it is, but for whatever reason, it has to play out a certain way to get people to wake up and really realize what's going on, because it literally got into everything.
What we're speaking about, Michelle, with race and religion and all that, it's everything we spoke about prior to this as well. Sports, anything that creates division, unbalancing. I feel people, all they need to do is just not pay attention to any of that ball that they try to do. At the end of the day, they're going to pit you against blue v red or white v black. To choose a side, to unbalance us, again, to separate us. And we need to just see through that. That's our power, our strength. It's just not being influenced by that outside world, isn't it? And just before we leave, I know it sounded weird before when I was talking about the car parks, but I was thinking about it, and ultimately, all a car is a vehicle, similar to what the body is. And something that struck me with car parks in particular, what happens in car parks? Cars are kept safe, they say, and parked, but also cars are stolen. They go missing. And you know where I'm leading to with this, the amount of people that go missing inside parks. It's just a weird similar coincidence. And if you put them next to each other, they spell the same, car and park. If we change the C and the thingy, it's exactly the same again. I just wanted to show you this last bit, sorry, we know about everybody. Adam was speaking about this before, wasn't you, Ad, about the flow, about a forest and all, the flow, resting in a forest, in a park. But it got me thinking about computers, which we already speak about with the Earth's grid, don't we? So, I was thinking about a battery, and it reminded me of the word botany, which is to do with the plants and the study of plants, their architecture, the structure. I'm just trying to speed through this, guys, for you without but still touching on it. Motor, when we flip the W and change the O's, because I do that with a lot of things, it gives us water. And this was getting me down the lines of an engine, motor, towards more the computer chip where we're at before. Inside a computer, what can happen inside a computer. And also what I thought was interesting is one anagram of park, if we was to flip the P, it gives us carb. So a carb is what we eat again, and carbs are important, and carbs are energy. So all this again keeps leading back to energy parks, energy harvesting, all this same stuff. I found this interesting because if you zoomed in on the picture, you can see the swastika, which is actually the symbol of, a very ancient symbol as we know, which has been inverted. But just a fan on a computer. I'll put it on the screen for people so they can see it. But looking down more
similar to that.
Pardon, mate.
And it's similar to those pictures Michelle was showing on the Isle of Wight, and the flags and the symbolism of the Isle of Man, for example.
Yeah, it does.
It's exactly the same pattern.
It's exactly the same. Yeah, it is. I'll put it on as well. It's exactly the same. Yeah. So just heading towards more the chip, the circuit board Earth again. I found it was interesting with parks enclosures, and normally around a park you've got a fence or a fence. And as Adam pointed out on my Oxford video with the chip being similar to the spires on top of the Oxford building, I found these very similar to almost the fence around a park. Especially in the UK, it's mostly metal fences. But then it got me thinking along the lines, guys, how could you connect multiple motherboards? Because batteries and the components to a circuit board, I can see more of them across the earth. There's not just one of them. There's not just one of, do you know what I mean? There's multiple. So then I was trying to find pictures of it, and I thought some of these pictures were really interesting because you could combine multiple motherboards together. And essentially what this would create for us, if we're to talk about in a world scale, is the world. But like in terms of countries, counties, towns. But it's a case of thinking of this circuit board as absolutely huge with potential additions added on. We see things replicated all over the world, don't we? You know, similar like things as well. And I'm going to the circuit board here, but I think it's all...
No, it makes sense because with circuit boards, you're mentioning, Chad, someone has to come up with an idea of it. And where do the ideas originate? It usually originates from nature because nature's the ultimate creator. So and you can relate everything man-made into the natural pattern of things. You know, it's there.
We saw these before. This is like meant to be one of the biggest motherboards in the world, but look at that.
You know, like it's a cityscape.
It's a city, isn't it? It's a city. So what, you know, but because I've not got an electrical background, I'm wondering, well, what's that? What's that? What's that? But interestingly, on this photo I found, I just thought it was interesting because there was a cross on it. And I just thought, I know it sounds silly, but a church, you know, like, I'm unsure. I need to look more into electronics, but I think we've got some of it. When Adam was saying about the universities and the spires, I don't think we're far off with these type of buildings because the energy generating buildings are with that energy. But it's just, I think when we mention it to people, they just think that, and that's not big enough or it's not enough. But we've got to multiply that and add and add and add and add, you know, and we get multiple servers. And this is where we get multiple universes and all that kind of idea. It goes very deep. You know, how big is that? How many, you know, I'm unsure of the dimensions of it or whether it's like that or more laid out like that. I don't know, guys, but just looking at that, come on.
We get caught up on what we've been told in our narrative about when places were built. And sometimes it's hard to get past that timeline that we've been given and see everything as having been built as a circuit board up until relatively recently. And I'm going to go into that the next time we talk to show why I think that however they flipped the timeline took place relatively recently. And we're still using all of their infrastructure in cities and other places. But it's been attributed to much more recent building and things like that. But it still doesn't match what we're told we're capable of. Because the builders of this civilization were highly advanced and highly sophisticated, and they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew exactly where they were on the earth and where everything connected together to get the multiple motherboard effect of what you're finding, Chad, because that, you know, totally makes sense. And yeah, that looked like a city.
If you were to compare that and show somebody that, they probably thinks that it's a plan of a city, without a doubt.
So Michelle, what you're saying essentially, the old people, the ancients, let's say, could have been engineers of great. You know, let's talk about a computer. It's an engineer, isn't it? It's a great engineer. And then that creation has been hijacked or twisted and changed parts and components of it, potentially from the original engineer or engineers. And this might go back to creator. I'm unsure how far we want to go, but, you know, it could plow down from that. But this technological, you know, spiritual, everything, because it's everything, isn't it? Essentially, it depends how it manifests itself.
And they've just reverse engineered everything and, you know, changed it, like you said, and inverted it. And I mean, all you have to do is look at the world we live in today and the gaslighting and the crazy agendas that are being pushed. And, you know, it's insane. And I remember several years ago, I found a movie called Topsy Turvy, and it was about Gilbert and Sullivan. And I want to say I probably saw it, let's say in the late 90s is probably when I watched it. And if you look up things about Gilbert and Sullivan, there was a period of time called Topsy Turvy or Topsy Turvydom. And I feel like that's what we're living right now.
Mm.
Good is bad, you know, right is wrong is right. You know, that's being broadcast and blasted at us all the time. Well, it's not. And most people know that, but there's so much of it, it's just hard to kind of wade through the messages and saying, wait a minute, that's not right. What they're saying is not right. You know, burning buildings is not a peaceful protest. I mean, but it's like we've been hammered, and that kind of gets into that other research that you're working on with the mind control and what's been going on with that and how that's kind of built into everything. So it's not just one program that took place, let's say in Montauk Point. It's a worldwide application of how to control all of us. And I'm getting the sense, Chad, and maybe you too, Adam, and maybe with some of the things we talked about today with the homeless shelters and, you know, the asylums of the past, is that it's leading you in the direction of doing that research on the mind control stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you started out there.
No.
I think you're probably, you know, veering off there because it's so glaring.
Yeah, that MK stuff, Michelle, it's all new to me, but I've learned so much, you know, the programming, but it's everything. Yeah. It's all part of the same agenda which you keep talking about. It's the same thing, just a branch of it, if you like.
And the original humans were sovereign. They were, you know, they were brilliant. They knew how to work with the elements. They knew, you know, alchemy was, you know, a lot of what was their knowledge. They knew how to apply that in a positive way. And the controllers just came in and just flipped the script. And you know, humanity's been treated horribly.
Yeah.
And so I'll be looking forward to getting past this cycle and into the new one. And what I'm seeing is we're talking about the controllers being in power the last couple hundred years. I don't see thousands of years. I see hundreds of years in my research. And they've done an incredible amount of work in that 100 years to bring us the world we live in today. But it's all about power and control and of resources of us, of the grid. And, you know, from what I'm gathering is they want to port us into some place to where they can, you know, harvest our source energy forever. I mean, that's what I'm gathering from all this stuff is, you know, we're the ultimate prize because we don't know who we are and we don't know our power. And so, you know, they definitely see us as a prize and why they've done this.
So on that note, take your power back, people. Time to empower yourself in every single possible way. No more dependence.
Turn off mainstream.
Yeah.
Turn off the mainstream news.
Absolutely.
All of that.
And what are they pumping out? Everything they're throwing out, all the fear. People take their own, you know, sovereignty back and realise who they are and their true potential. They're not going to have energy to feed off. They're going to just basically, you know, distinguish themselves.
Yeah.
And that's where we're heading.
And,
so
and
just, you know, take back your control.
And we can't wait for everyone, can we? We can't wait for Ad to do it, like all Adam's family and all of Warwick to do it. We need to be the change. So, you know, once we become that change, we're the lighting we had. And it's not about waiting for other people. It's about us trying to do that one by one. It's collectively becomes larger.
And it's kind of a scary time to be alive, but it's also an exciting time to be alive. And, you know, seeing the awakening happen in real time, knowing that it's happening. And, you know, I know the reason we do what we do is because we want to get the information that we've received out to people, you know, to give them more information to base a decision on. And, you know, making a change. You know, do you go with the status quo and what you're told, or do you start thinking critically and asking questions and ultimately arriving at the same place we have.
Just give them that option to search for themselves, because you can't force anybody or tell anybody if they disagree with you. It's for them to discover it in their own way. So getting the information out there at least gives people that opportunity to see what is available out there, and then choose for themselves whatever they feel intuitively which way they should go.
Absolutely. And this, like you were saying, Adam, this isn't something that you can just tell people. I don't. People need this information, to receive this information when they're ready for it, or it creates dissonance and discord and conflict, and that's not where I'm going with this. People have to be ready for it, and that's the beauty of the internet and platforms like YouTube and things like that, is the people that are ready for it find it, seek it, look for it.
One thing we can do, guys, everyone deserves compassion and love. That's what they will do deserve. And if we give that everybody, some will choose that way because they wouldn't have before. Do you know what I mean? I don't expect everybody to come to the same knowledges and become a wicked at Dalsa like Ad, or a perfect researcher like Michelle. I think we can definitely give compassion and love, can't we?
Right. And that's at the bottom line. That's where we're going, because the only way out is up.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
love is the highest vibration.
Yes.
We're not gonna solve this by staying at the same level of consciousness that created the problem.
Nope.
So you're spot on, Chad. I mean, that's where, as a collective, we have to go. Let the creator or the whatever hold the people behind it responsible or accountable. And I believe that will happen. We can't contribute to the solution by being angry and upset about it, though it's quite natural to experience that. And I'm not knocking that. I've experienced that. It's how am I going to get to love when my body's going crazy knowing what's going on? But that's our challenge, is that we, as a group, not everybody, because it's not required for everybody, it's that whole it doesn't take a great shift in consciousness to change the whole direction. That's been shown. David Hawkins and Power versus Force. It doesn't take everybody, but it takes enough. Takes enough of us.
We're that close, basically. we're almost
there, guys. We're getting there.
Yeah. So it's not hopeless by any means. I appreciate the conversation with you, Chad and Adam.
Been lovely, guys.
And we'll do it again soon, because I haven't finished.
There's a lot more out
with
there
the
to
presentation. There's more.
There's always more. Thank you so much, guys, for your talk. And I'm pretty sure there'll be a follow-up of some sort towards this, won't there?
Yeah. Probably this one, and then there's two more that I just didn't have time to put together before we met today, and that'll be more revealing, I think. And it seems to be synchronistically connected, so I'm sure there's going to be more.
So yeah, how do I start this off? Because obviously I'm going to edit this bit, but do I? Is this just so like what? Hey guys, what are we doing here today?
It's like, so basically, I've got the title of this as "Compelling Evidence for the Harvesting of the Earth's Original Energy Grid System and Us."